This is a video for moms, especially moms who have breastfed a child. If that's not you, if you've never done it before, I'm not saying you have to leave, but you just have to be aware that I'm not telling this story for you. Are you still with me? Okay, let's talk. I just love telling this story. I want to tell you about the night when I became vegan. And I promise it is related to breastfeeding, and it's also related to bike commuting for some reason. Bear with me. It's a little complex, but I think you will find it interesting and you may even learn something. I don't know. My son was born in spring of 2015 in April. This is his room. This is where he is now. So I thought I would honor him and spend just a minute in here. This room wouldn't be in my life without him. At the time, I was already seriously underslept. Before he was born, I had a daughter who is at the time 3.5 years old. And to me, there was no question that my son would be breastfed just like I had breastfed his sister. The first time around, oh yeah, the first month had been challenging. I think it is for most people. But once that relationship, the nursing relationship was established, it was so easy. And of course, there's supposedly health benefits and there's certainly emotional benefits, but I'm a practical person. No bottles to clean and no formula to carry around. I thought it was just amazing, and milk on demand is so convenient. I didn't expect it to be so easy, though. My friends who had become mothers before me had had tons of issues, and they were not enthusiastic about nursing. One of them even told me that she hated breastfeeding because it made her feel like a cow. And when she said that, I thought, wait a minute, what's wrong with being a cow? Now, you have to know that I come from a family of dairy farmers. My grandfather was a dairy farmer. It was not like a big farm like in the 21st century. I'm not even sure if he had 100 cows. But after my grandpa passed away, before I was born, my father ran the dairy farm for a little while. And however, by the time I was born, we no longer had cows. My father had moved on to pigs. And however, dairy farming was all around. Even as a tiny little girl, I have memories, vivid memories of visiting one of my uncles who had lots of cows and having a glass of warm, like fresh cow's milk. That was part of life. Dairy was all around. And I totally knew where milk came from. But in case you don't know, here's a refresher. Cows are mammals, just like us. A lot of people seem to think that cows make milk just like apple trees make apples, right? And if you've never looked into it, I'm not going to blame you, but it is not how it works. That is very far from the truth. Mammalian females make milk when they bear offspring, babies, when they have babies. So we make milk, mammals, cows, and humans, when we become mothers. That is true for us, that is true for cows. So back to breastfeeding, my friend hated what she called being a milk machine. But for me, I thought it's pretty cool to be a milk machine. I am a mom and I make milk to feed my baby. It's the perfect food for her. It was my first child, my daughter, and it was my superpower. What could possibly be wrong with that, right? I did not connect the dots until much further down the road in that fateful night of spring 2015 that I want to talk to you about. But to understand what happened on that night in the spring of 2015, we have to go back again, and I'm sorry, do a little bit of a detour via bike commuting about 18 months prior to that. So do you think that vegans are a little bit too self-righteous? You haven't met a bike commuter. And how I know that is because I am one of them. Or, well, I used to be. I'm not commuting anywhere right now, but I just love riding my bike around the city. And being vegan, we get all sorts of annoying questions like, haven't you died from protein deficiency yet? But being a bike commuter, we have a 2-ton SUV driven by somebody who is watching YouTube on their phone at the same time, sometimes inadvertently trying to push us off the road. And so we are actually risking our life. It's not like being protein deficient. We might just end up with a broken neck in the ditch, right? So bike commuters like to hang out together in those online cycling forums, to commiserate and talk about all the bad things that happened to them. And in 2013, probably in the fall of 2013, I was doing exactly that. When I bumped into somebody online and got into a little bit of an argument. And what the dude told me at the time was, if you're riding your bike to work, but you're eating steak to fuel your ride, you might as well be driving a Hummer. Ouch. That hurt. See, I had always thought of myself as a good earth, planet-friendly bike commuter, somebody who's doing the right thing for the planet. So I was intrigued because I'm also curious. So I looked into what the guy was saying, and to make a long story short, he was roughly right. It's not quite that bad, but it's no good. And I loved steak and I loved cheese, and I especially loved blue steak, like rare steak with blue cheese on top together. And for me, eating animals was something I just had taken for granted my whole life, and eating animal products. And I've told you, I come from a farming family, so animals were always there for us, not with us, as vegans like to say. I was still not at the stage when that guy said that thing that really threw me off my rockers about changing my diet choices. But I was really ashamed. I felt shame about the environmental footprint of my bike commute, about the environmental footprint of my whole life. And that did not sit right with me. So I decided to do something and try to seriously decrease the amount of meat I was eating. The easiest place for me to start was at home, right? The food I was cooking. So by spring 2014, I decided to take a step in what felt like the right direction. I decided to do an experiment and take a plant-based Lent period, the 40 days before Easter. And my rules were that I would only cook and eat vegan food at home. If we were eating out, I would choose a vegetarian option, which was usually pretty easy to find. And if I was eating at friends or family's house, I would eat whatever they gave me. And that worked out pretty much okay. I was doing most of the cooking at home. My husband at first didn't notice, but then he noticed and he was not super happy about it. But he was open-minded about the bean dishes and he loved the vegetables, and it was, new and interesting. I was putting a lot of effort into making those meals, so it must have been tasting good. And that just kept going okay. Even after Lent was finished, I more or less continued to follow that general idea, those general rules. And when I was pregnant with my son a few months later, that would have been by late summer 2014, I found myself eating eggs quite a bit because it seemed to be the only thing that would prevent me from, throwing up in the early mornings. And I kept eating milk products on a semi-regular basis, not so much at home, but maybe having a muffin from the coffee shop without, even looking for a vegan option. And if I was visiting family or friends, I was certainly eating meat at the time. Until that fateful night after my son was born. I'm going to be recording this here in my room because that's where it happened, over there on my side of the bed. It must have been about 3 a.m. My baby boy was finally asleep in my arms. He must have been like 3 or 4 weeks. I was just coming out of that daze of being now a mom of two and life being a lot more complicated all of a sudden. And my son was so small. He was, just fitting like this in the crook of my elbow with his head so peacefully rested there against my breast, and he was sleeping finally. And I was exhausted. You have no idea. If you haven't been a breastfeeding mom, feeding through the night, you have no idea how tired and kind of starting to hallucinate. And I wanted so bad to put him down, but I knew if I put him down, he would wake up. And so I just kept him there in my arms, and I was marveling at how beautiful and perfect he was. And it hit me at that moment. I just realized that if I had been a cow instead of a woman, my son and I, we wouldn't be there at all. My son, being a boy, he would have been taken away one day or maybe two after birth. Once my milk had come, that was it for him. He would have been taken away to slaughter to make veal meat. And I, the cow, would have been hobbling my way to the milk pump to deal with the engorgement, because I would have had so much milk meant for my baby, but the baby wasn't there anymore. He was gone to slaughter. My milk, that perfect food intended for my baby, would have been pumped out and sold to humans. As a mother, how could I, as a human mother, how could I be doing this to another mother, continuing to use the products of their exploitation? They're exploited not just because they're female, but exploited because they're mothers. And so eventually morning came, and I decided I could no longer be complicit into such suffering imposed on being in my name. It was a bit uncomfortable for me because now I would have to be cooking vegan all the time. I would have to look for the vegan option, not just be content with vegetarian. It would be even more uncomfortable because when we were visiting friends and family, loved ones, I would have to decline politely that I did not want the animal foods. I decided not to eat them. But that discomfort of mine paled in comparison to the pain of losing a baby. And that is how I decided to not just eat vegan, but to be vegan. Eventually, the rest of my family more or less followed along with that. It's a bit of a story for another day. But the bottom line is that we're living quite happily as a predominantly plant-based family today. What I was not expecting, but what might have been the biggest consequence of that decision, that fateful decision I made that night, was the relief. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. There was that knowledge that I had always had in my heart of heart and my brain, probably more than in my heart, that was always there. And for the longest time, that knowledge was really in contradiction with my values. That feeling of integrity and wholeness from living in line with my values was mind-blowing. I'm going to end the story here for today, except to share a tiny anecdote with you that many years later, my mom heard me tell this story on someone's podcast, and she called me and she told me this story. Remember, she was raised around my grandfather's dairy farm. And she told me about how when she was a little girl, she thought it was very sad and probably a little bit annoying too, that day when the calves, the baby cows, were taken away from the cows, and the cows would spend all day mooing for their babies. And that reminded me that my friend was right. Being a cow, it does suck. It sucks really bad, but not at all for the reasons I was imagining at the time I first heard that. If this story intrigues you, if you're starting to have thoughts about maybe letting go of dairy or not eating any more animal products, but you're a little bit anxious or curious about the nutrition aspects of this or the cooking aspects, of course, please go ahead and ask me all the questions. I am dedicated to help you find some answers about that. But that relief that I felt, you could feel it too if you make some different decisions. And I hope you will consider it perhaps at the end of listening to my story. So thank you for listening. And I will very much hope to see you again soon in my vegan family kitchen.